That's a great question. Is DEI failing? Here's what I would say. DEI often has been looked at as one initiative, whereas D stands for diversity, which talks about representation. E, equity, which is about the fairness and process, procedures, systems that govern people. And I is inclusion, which is about culture and how everyone, irrespective of who you are, where you're from, can work together in harmony, respect, and value. And then there's a belonging and so on and so forth, right? So DEI for me, it's really about humanity. But what this question presents with regards to the makeup of the corporate workspace in America, I think that conversation is not so much about DEI. I think that conversation begins at the historical context of how we got here. And I don't know the numbers, but if you look at the population of the United States in terms of African Americans, and then if you look at the population of white Americans and other diversity dimensions, and you look back into the history of America back in the 1800s or even earlier, you would begin to see that there have been a lot of work done to advance blacks in America. And so when I think about DEI, I think DEI is really a corporate initiative to find a sense of harmony, fairness within the workplace, but I think it's a bit ambitious.
I believe that there's a significant difference in the pay gap between white people and black people because there is no seriousness to closing that gap. There is lip service. There are measures that suggest a box is being checked, but there's no true seriousness to close that pay gap. We'll diversify it. We will have black people, black men, black women, people of color. But when it comes to pay, because not everyone talks openly about their salaries, you're not aware that your peer may be paid more or less than you. Especially being black, chances are you're not going to ask your white counterpart what their salary is. And also chances are you won't go to human resources to ask them to release, or even a Freedom of Information Act a request to ask that information be shared with you. So there are certainly measures to discover what those pay gaps are, but who wants to suffer the consequences of what might be behind what that difference in pay looks like?
20% of blacks working are having a fantastic experience. 20% on the opposite end are having a horrible experience. And there's 60% that's in the middle that's having God knows what kind of experience. It could be good some days, bad some days. And it is that middle experience that then starts to shape the narrative of the overall experience. Because people will explain away the 20%. Even people of color will explain away the 20%. But it is that 60% that starts to shape the narrative of how people are experiencing the organization or that company or organization's reputation for recognizing diversity, equity, inclusion in the organization. And so that's when I talk about the good, better, best organizations understand that. And so they are constantly trying to ensure that, hey, everybody is having an equitable and fair experience so that when they are judged for their performance and contribution, that it is fair and equitable.
I think that
Advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion in many ways by many people is viewed, and they may not really recognize it, but it's a very personal decision. It is a personal, emotional decision. If I make room for someone else, particularly if I make a selection for someone, a woman or a professional of color, or someone who is not necessarily on the surface identified as the majority dominant population, what am I gonna lose? What's the risk? You hear that a lot. Oh, we should take a risk and do that. Well, why is it a risk if you go in this direction? If all of the background and credentials and everything is there, would you have said that about someone who happens to be also of the dominant culture? And sometimes I think that not enough attention is paid to why are we making some of the decisions that we're making. The whole joke around, well, I have one black friend kind of thing, that's real, because that means that you probably haven't really been educated on various nuances of what it means to be a black person. In America, in the neighborhood, in the company, or what have you, you may be getting your insights from media.
Tom, in your book, you try to answer a question that has bedeviled many people before you, which is, why do African Americans continue to lag behind other groups in so many aspects of American life? And your conclusion is an intriguing one, that a 400-year-old marketing campaign to promote white superiority and black inferiority has resulted in a deep-seated, internalized black inferiority complex that is keeping African Americans from achieving many of their goals. This is the brainwashing you're talking about in your book?
Yes. Cheryl, America has been sold a bill of goods through false advertising. The myth of black inferiority, the big lie, that there is an inherent inferiority that exists within a race of people. That is something that has been created in order to originally justify slavery within a democracy. And we see it borne out every day from morning till night throughout our media. Media is the major carrier of the message.
Ask yourself one simple question. If you grow up seeing thousands of examples on television, in books and cartoons, of blacks being the victims of aggression and violence, and also as perpetrators, what seed does that plant? Fast forward to today. Although most racist advertising is not tolerated, the damage has been done. There's still a strong undercurrent in this country that feels blacks are less than other races, especially in the workforce. If we want to understand why blacks are treated unfairly in the workplace, we have to step back to see how blacks have been portrayed in pop culture.
There are many intentional markers as it relates to advertising and how Black Americans show up in those ads. We see some early days with toothpaste commercials. We see that in early days of cleaning products and how white women are deemed as the ones that can really get the house clean, that they are able to make sure that things happen. They can keep their husbands satisfied. And then you see further into the future where Black women may be a part of an ad, but they're over-sexualized. They're showing up in terms of liquor commercials and even cigarette commercials and deemed as these symbols of misogyny and also of how hypersexual they may be. And the conundrum that we see is that also, as we look into the future, there are many ways where we've been trying to correct that system that was originally very intentional to deem Black women, Black men as less than. To fast forward to the 21st century, you see that there are several brands after the fallout of issues or products that may have said, hey, this isn't good, this isn't kind for certain cultural groups. We saw that with several brands like H&M. We saw that with formerly known as Aunt Jemima, which is now renamed. And so there's several brands that have tried to correct these paths. Saw that in Pepsi, where we saw a very famous human that was a part of the Kardashian family bring peace just with a bottle of Pepsi. And unfortunately, that isn't going to solve the issues that we have today. What's really going to solve the issues are those that do have platforms, that they utilize them to talk about the injustices of the world.
You know, to wake up every day and to have the responsibility to make a difference. I think we all, when we wake up, have that privilege and gift. So no matter, what you believe in, whether your faith or purpose in life, I think every time we wake up in life, I think we have an opportunity to make a difference. And to wake up Black in America sometimes feels that there are barriers in your way in making a difference in life every day. It just sometimes requires additional thinking. It requires additional caution. It requires additional effort to navigate simple things in life. And I'll give some examples. Here's one that really got to me, and I think this is something that truly is a remarkable experience of mine. I spent 6 months of last year living in London, UK, as part of a work assignment where I was really trying to understand what does DEI mean in another part of the world. What are the classifications of the different dimensions of diversity? In the US, I'm quite clear on what they are, right? But does it mean the same in other parts of the world? And so I spent 6 months there. And one of the things I can tell you went with me was the fact that I was Black. I was Black in the US and I was Black there, right? But what did not come with me after a while that I also noticed was that living in the US, I have a awareness of my surroundings, especially when it comes to police officers. There's an awareness. I wouldn't say it's a fear, but I'm definitely cautious of my movements. I'm cautious of what I'm doing. I'm cautious to make sure that I'm not doing something that could provide even the perception of anything. I see guns on people's hips, and I understand that a gun can be pretty final if used. And so these are things that I live with in the U.S. When I'm driving my vehicle, if a car is going by, you better believe I'm the person that's like, okay, what's the speed limit? What am I with my feet? Like, are my lights? Like, I immediately have a sense like my chest tightens. Doing absolutely nothing wrong. When I spent 6 months in London, not once did I feel that way.
You write about another area where African Americans feel inferior, about how they look, that they've been conditioned to believe that Caucasian physical features are attractive and that Black physical features are ugly. Mm-hmm. So what happened to Black is beautiful, which was so prevalent in the 60s and 70s?
The problem with Black is beautiful is that it did not come from the core. It was a topical approach to dealing with the issue. You got to do more than just say it. You've got to internalize it. Plus, Black is Beautiful lost its traction because it was fighting against the onslaught of opposing images that it couldn't compete with.
To take an objective lens to Mr. Burrell's statement, who beautifully stated that there is an intentional trajectory that we're following, just as humans and also as Black humans, where we take these pieces of life that have been designed for us to fail, designed for us to be seen as inferior to our white counterparts. And may I also say to many of our Latino counterparts, many of our Asian counterparts, and many people that do not identify as Black. There's something to the effect of being a part of a world that will deem you as insignificant, and then having to claim that you are significant, trying hard in your career, trying hard in the way you see yourself in the mirror, your beauty, seeing in the mirror of how you need to see the way that you show up into the world. And so there's something about the inferiority that we have seen for the last 400 years. And I like to add even from the transatlantic slave trade, where we have seen a significant amount of trauma that has happened to Black Americans. And there's relevance to today, right? Obviously, that book was written in 2010, and we see that 13 years later, where there are still the perpetuation of a standard of beauty, a standard of accomplishments, a standard of what success looks like, and still being Black is not enough. And when we look at how the Crown Act has been able to continuously shape how Black women see themselves when they look in the mirror, also how Black men show up in the workplace, how they can wear their hair with freedom, with liberation, to feel connected to this connection to Black culture and Black history. There's something very beautiful about that.
I've definitely shrank who I was to fit the mold of corporate America. And that's something that's talked about in some of my social circles even. And as a Black person, culturally, we kind of have that understanding, especially when it comes to code switching, even now doing this interview. This is code switching for me. My vernacular is such that someone would call it urban speak. But for the purposes of interviews, being in the workplace, the workspace, and depending on environments that I'm in, it's actually necessary, and for me has become common to code switch in those places to a point that I don't feel comfortable not code switching in those spaces, and sometimes even to my own Black brothers and sisters who I may meet in certain circles that are work related. People say, bring your whole selves into the workplace. Well, exactly what does that mean? Because to bring my whole self into the workplace or into the space or into this environment means I melt it down. I make it do what it do. I talk like this when I'm at home. In my social circle, I'm D. I'm your girl. I'm from around the way. I'm West Side, I'm hood. But is that what you want to hear? Is that what sits well with us in these circles? And so that's being Black. It really is what it means to be Black in the workplace. And then, some may say, well, it depends where you work at, where you're employed. And actually, it does. But by and large, in most of our workspaces, my Black people, my Black brothers, my Black sisters, if you know, you know.
Pulitzer Prize-winning author Isabel Wilkerson says racism is an insufficient term for the systemic oppression of Black people in America. She prefers to refer to America as having a caste system. Wilkerson describes caste as an artificial hierarchy that helps determine standing and respect, assumptions of beauty and competence, and even who gets the benefit of the doubt and access to resources. It is an underlying infrastructure that often works on a hierarchy system. When one caste moves up, one must inevitably move down. It is understandable to say no one wants to move down in this hierarchy. As a result, there are boundaries put in place to keep the status quo. In the American caste system, whites are on top and blacks are at the bottom. This might appear to be an absurd statement on the surface. However, through the next discussion, we will explore how this caste system affects how we treat blacks, as well as other races or genders in the workplace. Some may define it as unconscious bias. Our focus and the ultimate basis of this discussion is to ask the simple question: with the American caste system fully embedded in our culture, how will our workplace ever achieve equity and parity for those individuals who are black?
We do. America has a caste system. We know it, but we won't completely own it. And therein lies the problem. The difference between white people being above and black people being beneath. And if you ask me, there really is no in-between. There is no identifiable in-between in this, what I would call very subliminal caste system. Some people don't believe that there is a caste system because it's so surface. But as a black person, we take deep dives. We're always wondering. We always know. Now, those of us who have leadership roles, or just depending on who we are as people, we're black and we're proud to be black.
I think I have a pretty unique perspective of the caste system, or what caste systems mean. I was born in Chicago, but I was raised in Lagos, Nigeria, in West Africa. Spent the first 14 years of my life in Lagos, Nigeria, and to understand what a caste system means in Nigeria, this is a place where the vast majority, over 90% of everyone, looks the same. Coming to a space where I immediately became the minority, right? So imagine growing up to 14, you're the majority. You live in a country where you're the vast majority. You come to the U.S. at 14, and you immediately become the vast minority, and you began to experience things in a different way. And then that same caste system, that same idea of this hierarchical categories were put in, right? And that's, to me, that's why I think of caste as about everyone being categorized into a certain bucket or definition, and based on that, imagine a pyramid on top of that, and that pyramid gives you access to opportunities, or there are certain stigmas that come against it or with it. And so when I think about the caste system, and I think about my experience in America as a black man, and a black man with African descent, I agree with the idea that it goes beyond the idea of racism. This is something that is institutional, something that is systematic. Give example in Chicago, and the story about redlining, right? Where just simply based on where you live, has a tremendous impact on your entire livelihood. So if I live in Bronzeville, for example, I was born in Bronzeville, my parents are from Bronzeville, I grew up in Bronzeville, redlining has determined the cost of car insurance, it's determined the value of my property. The value of my property determines, based on the system, determines the amount of property tax I pay. The amount of property tax I pay determines the quality of schools my kids get to go to, I get to go to, the quality of, right? And that cost also determines, what the school receives from public funding also determines the type of quality of teachers you get and resources you get, and library and books and all this other different things. And you begin to see the system where those who come from maybe more poverty-stricken areas, just based on just location, kind of have a smaller piece of the American dream.
My mother indirectly taught me about the caste system, right? She would say things like, they want you to be good, but never better than them, right? She would say things like, you have to work twice as hard. When you walk into, certain settings, and I think it's not even untrue today that we're still having to pass laws like the Crown Act and things like that for our people. So I do think that's a very true statement, that the caste system is very alive and well.
We haven't seen the quantum breakthroughs given the overall browning of America, and but we're still not seeing that breakthrough through the top echelons of corporate America at the same rate. So on one hand, one would say, is this systemic? And when I think caste system, I think systematized, agreed upon rules of engagement of how things should be, implied and explicit. And so I think this is what we run into when we're talking about the employee experience or the work experience of a diverse person who is showing up Black, also happen to be with a disability, also who may be a member of the LGBTQ community. So when your race and identity show up, there can be these moments of like, where do we place you? Where's your value, your perceived value, not your real value, but your perceived value based on some artificial construct like the caste system.
And so I would say we're for sure a caste system. I experience it every day, which is why it's so important for me as an African American leader to walk in boldness and authenticity. So if that means I have to wear box braids and knotless braids in my hair so my people can have representation, I'll do that. If that means that I have to, have conversations that are uncomfortable with my colleagues and peers when they say things that they shouldn't say, I'll do that as well. But a lot of that is to combat this idea of the caste system that I think is going to take generations for us to get our way out of.
The biggest thing is there is no magic bullet. Every organization has its own idiosyncrasies and nuances. I think we really have to keep that in mind. Then I think each of us has to be willing to take a good, long, hard look at ourselves. What do I understand about what makes me tick? What do I understand about any biases that I may harbor? And oh, by the way, we all have biases. How are they formed? How do they sort of interact with your day-to-day sort of existence and dealings? How do they maybe impede your progress? How are they maybe helping you advance what you want to do? But I don't think enough people, a part of any training or anything else, spend enough time becoming aware of really what makes them tick.
Is DEI working? Depends on your perspective. If you're looking at a moment in time, one could say no. But if you're looking at the continuum of time, we are seeing improvements. There are more people of color in management and leadership ranks than ever before. Yet, we still don't see those numbers growing exponentially at the top of the house in the C-suite. So it really depends on your point of view, if it's working or not working.
I believe the general state of diversity, equity, and inclusion is one that's it really sits on the fence, because there are so many corporations, organizations, individuals who mean well. Their intentions started out wanting to do better and to be better. But then there's a sense of discomfort that comes with doing better and be better. As a Black person, I don't feel that discomfort. I'm all about it. And I want to talk about it, and I want to be about it.
In a 2021 McKinsey & Company report entitled Race in the Workplace, Black employees face 5 common challenges in the private sector. 1. A trust deficit exists between Black employees and their companies. 2. Black employees lack the sponsorship and allyship to support their advancement. 3. Frontline jobs largely do not connect Black employees with sufficient opportunities to advance. 4. Entry-level jobs are a revolving door, and Black employee attrition is high. 5. Black employees encounter a broken rung from entry-level jobs to managerial jobs.
My point of view on if it's working or not working, I've been in this space of human capital, organizations, and talent and HR for over 30 years now. And I've got a long view because I've been in this business of people and organizations. So I can say we're making improvements, but at the same time, it feels like we're holding water, like we're not having those significant breakthroughs that I think we all were hoping to see. It doesn't mean I don't think they're coming. I just think they're taking slower than we had anticipated because there's always contrast in the system. And the question and the challenge is how do we adjust and deal with that contrast to actually see that what I call those quantum movements forward with more representation.
Yeah, from a DI perspective, some of the things I think we're doing right is the attention that DEI has amassed over the last few years, especially. It's the some of the resources that we're seeing companies tie around supporting DEI programs. But I think the biggest thing we're doing wrong is DEI right now in the U.S. specifically is similar to that of a injured individual with wounds. Some of those wounds are deeply cutted wounds, and DEI is almost like a Band-Aid, attempted to heal the wounds. But the Band-Aid doesn't have any type of medical ointment. There has not been enough work to try to consider what's causing the wounds. So I feel like it's really just more of a, addressing the symptoms to show we care. And it's less about saying, okay, what's causing this wounds?
When we think about the work experience, there's 2 components that make up the work experience. You, the talent, the employee, and the organization. Both are dynamic and ever-changing, so neither are static. So just keep that in mind when we're talking about this. You've got 2 entities that are constantly changing and trying to adjust and adapt to each other at all times. So inherently, that's going to create some dissonance and some contrast and challenges in it at the same time of creating opportunities. And so when you think of you, the employee, you're showing up with a whole lot. You're showing up with your expectations, your attitudes, your belief, your knowledge, your skills, your talent. And you also are showing up with your diversity and all of the dimensions therein, and your identity, how you want to be acknowledged and recognized in the workplace. Then you've got this huge organization. It could be as small as 5 people or as large as 150,000 people, all organized around a particular mission and purpose to achieve something. And that organization, just like you as an individual, has beliefs and attitudes, values, culture. And when you start putting the individual into the collective, it's always like this interesting balance, like how do I show up with my individuality into this collective, and is the collective going to recognize and respect and appreciate that which I bring? So I set that table because when you unpack it even further, what we as individuals are looking for from that collective organization is access. We want to know that we've got fair and equitable access to opportunities to join that organization, to engage and grow in that organization. We're also looking for agency. An agency is basically, am I getting equipped? Do I have the tools and the resources to do the very thing that I'm contracted or employed to do? Can I get my job done at the end of the day? And then the third thing that we often are looking for, sometimes openly or sometimes quietly, is advocacy. Are we getting the support from the leaders, the managers, and our team members to grow and develop so that we can contribute more, so we can be rewarded more, so that we can live better lives? And so when you look at us as the asset, right, and you've got the other things that we're looking for the organization on: access, agency, and advocacy. And inherently, both are changing. So there's always this give and flow. And unfortunately, sometimes for people of color or people with unique and different identities and dimensions of diversity, that could be challenging if the organization, the collective, doesn't respect who you are.
At the end of the day, and from my perspective, we are looking to have an increasingly diverse workforce that mirrors an increasingly diverse world, an increasingly diverse community. And from an inclusive standpoint, everybody wants to participate in the success of the organization, be it profit or nonprofit, it doesn't matter. People want to feel valued, respected, included, challenged, and developed. That's why they get up and come in and do what they do every single day. That's the bottom line of what we're after. From an equitable standpoint, are we getting the same level of access and opportunity that majority populations are? Whatever that majority population is within that firm. That's where the equity part comes in. So we have laws that talk about equality. We have fewer laws, if any, that talk about equity.
In the advertising industry, and I'd like to also add the marketing and the public relations industry, there are still significant barriers in those that are in leadership. We still see that there's about 7 to 8% of Black professionals that work within the industries. We also see that there's about 13 to 15% of Latinos and Asians that work within the advertising, marketing, and communications industries. There's a significant disparity, right? Many of the Black professionals and people of color that we do see in leadership, they are often diversity, equity, and inclusion officers and leaders. And so there's something very beautiful about that, right? There's something masterful about being a part of an organization and creating spaces for equity and for advocacy to take place. But unfortunately, oftentimes, many of those leaders are not set up for true success. Sometimes they may be deemed as shiny objects, of good for the company. And then there's also some instances where they are deemed as props and not given the right budget, not given the resources to do their job well, not given the opportunities to succeed just as like their counterparts who may work in operations or account management or creative. And so more often than not, there are times where we must rethink how we see the corporate landscape.
I do not feel obligated to make white people feel comfortable having conversations around equity and inclusion, racial equity, social justice, or anything of the like. And I do not because for years, as a Black woman, as a Black person, as a Black people, we have been subject to the discomfort of all that is. As I lead these facilitated discussions, what I say is prepare to be uncomfortable. As a practitioner, my role really is to have candid discussions, to talk seriously about what matters, and also offer actionable solutions to creating change. That is what I want to do. So the discomfort notwithstanding, we're going to talk about it. And we're going to talk about it in a way that is serious, that also makes you feel uncomfortable. But here again, I in no way feel obligated to make you feel comfortable, because what that means is I have to shrink myself to become what makes you rise and feel better. Not willing to do that.
You know, many workers at all levels have thought, okay, well, here we go again. This is, program du jour. How long is this going to last? And sometimes, quite frankly, it has been tied to the individual who's espousing what we're going to do. The charismatic CEO, the charismatic, D&I leader, or what have you. But if those individuals are removed, then some employees feel like, well, now what happens, right? Versus trying to get it massaged into the fabric of the organization. How does it exist? Who does it say it wants to be? What are its values? How is it manifesting those values and the mission and so forth? And so without that, it does feel incredibly performative in many ways, meaning we do it to, say we did something or to check certain boxes. And there are a lot of people that are watching that and going, what can I trust from you? What can I believe from you? So I think really organizations would be well served to really look at what are those primary policies and practices that may be keeping some inequitable outcomes in place.
It's more than checking the box and saying this person is here and we move on. It's saying this person is here and what kind of support do they need to be able to help us stay true to our word? Because if we don't, what will happen? And I believe that's what's not happening now. There's no thought to, if we don't remain serious about this, what will happen to our country, our organization, our company, me as a person? If in my household we never talk about inclusivity, racial equity, because it makes me feel uncomfortable, how then do we move the needle in our social circles? We have to find a way to have these conversations.
Now, let me tell you a story. I was leading DEI at a company, and there was a white male heterosexual executive who had been just an incredible man. He was one of the biggest advocates for our women's employee resource group. And he would, and at the time there wasn't budget for the resource group, so he would take money out of his business unit and provide. And he was one of the execs that was really just incredible. Would send me emails, hey, what can I do to support you guys and what you're doing with DEI? I think it's great. He had 3 girls, and all that good stuff. So we got to the point where we were gonna make the ERGs official and create a budget and X, Y, and Z and have more structure and have a charter. And we were looking for an executive sponsor, and everyone knew that, even though it was a women's ERG, they wanted this gentleman to be the executive sponsor because he's been doing the work for a while and is more of just. And so I went to his office and said, hey, listen, hey man, how are you? Thank you for all that you've done, X, Y, and Z. It's truly my honor to tell you that they want you, man. They want you to be the leader, executive sponsor of this group. And his response was interesting. He had a little shrug, and it was like, Yemi, can I be honest with you? I'm like, of course, please. He said, I'm less than a decade from retirement. I have 2 daughters out the house, one currently in high school. I think she was a junior at the time. And I have a beautiful wife who's stay-at-home mom. I cannot afford, and he's in his 50s, I cannot afford to lose my job. This climate that we're in, this idea of cancel culture, where if I say the wrong thing, I make a mistake, my livelihood could be gone. I could lose everything. And I'm passionate about this, and I'm ready to support. I'm happy to support from the back. But I don't want to be in a position where I would have to speak or say anything in regards to this. And that's my hesitation. But I'm willing to take courses and classes and learn, but I don't feel like I'm prepared to be in a space where the consequences of a mistake are greater than his 30 plus years of working. Listen to me. Because I understood. I got it. I'm like, that's real. That's real stuff. But the benefit, the privilege, is that he has a choice to make. That's a privilege. He could choose not to. He could choose to remove himself from the arena of threat. But some of us cannot do that. It's a skull of our skin.
We have to find a way to have these conversations. And I'm very proud to be part of an organization that does just that. We have a leader at Thresholds who is committed to ensuring that there is cultural awareness within the organization and cultural sensitivity. So much so that it's embedded in the strategic plan of the organization, and the governing body of the organization is a part of that. And how do I know? Because I lead it. I host those conversations that I am so passionate about. And though I know that it makes people uncomfortable to have the discussions, I create an environment that makes it very natural and comfortable to talk about something that some people just don't completely understand.
When we think about embedding DEI as a strategic value pillar for an organization, we can run the risk of good intentions, poor execution. Back to, yes, we always have this thing of we intend. The thing that I think that makes the difference between what I call the good, better, best organizations out there that are supportive and inclusive is the level of attention they give to that strategy around embedding diversity, equity, and inclusion. Not just the big, glossy, 3-ring binder strategy, but what are the accountabilities of leaders and managers and even the employees to uphold this strategy and to live this strategy and to execute it? And then what does it take to enable it? Meaning putting the resources, the time, and the attention to it. But then more importantly, making sure that you have the systems and checks and balances. Hey, is what we set out to do actually happening in the way that we want it to happen? Oftentimes, I've seen diversity, equity, inclusion strategies get the big rollout, and then there's no follow-up, no accountability, and then everybody's looking 3 to 5 years later and saying, hey, we have a strategy, but in most cases, that was what I would call the performative steps of diversity, equity, and inclusion, which we often see these days. And so again, the difference between the good, better, best organizations, the better organizations out there are ensuring that implementation and the accountability of that strategy is in place and is happening.
It's not embedded in companies' policies in a way where it's systemic. I'll give you a good example. Right now, there is a ton of tech layoffs happening in the U.S. Again, it's not new. I mean, when the economy goes through certain points. We're seeing high inflation, we're expecting a recession. Companies need to make the decisions to reduce costs and position themselves for what could be a recession that can go forever long, right? So we get it. Layoffs happen. We saw this in 2008. So this is not new. But what is new in comparison to 2008 is that about 3 years ago, there was a commitment for diversity, equity, and inclusion, where we are going to hire more people who are diverse. We're going to promote more people who are diverse. We're going to get more people into leadership, right? And do all these things. And we saw that happening from a lot of these big tech firms. But what we're seeing happen during these layoffs is that the vast majority of people who are being let go are disproportionately people of color and women. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you I feel it's targeted. I don't think someone's back there saying, hey, let's get the women out of the business, right? But what I'm saying is that the system in which we look at layoffs, whether it's looking at those who are getting paid X, Y, and Z, whether it's looking at, those who have, who are the first to come or last to go, whether we're looking at things like the type of roles and their impact to P&L, whatever those things are, we need tech companies to put on a DEI lens to look at the impact of what they're doing as well from a DEI perspective. Those are the individuals who get it right, who have figured this out. But that's not what's happening for the most part. You look at the same thing we looked at 10 years ago.
Now, in my practice, we really encourage leaders in particular to look at self first and then think about how is that vision of self and your collective biases and what have you, because I'm not asking you to change who you are. I am asking you to consider making different decisions that align with the direction the organization says that it wants to go, because I think oftentimes it is rooted in the unknown and fear, and I don't want to say the wrong thing, and I don't want to come off as, stereotyping people, and I don't want to come off as, ignorant or what have you, so I'll just withdraw. Well, that doesn't get us anywhere either. But I think at the end of the day, is there a fear of, if more people could be more successful, what will that mean for life as I know it, whatever that is, right? And unfortunately, our nation is so incredibly divided, and a lot of that is fueled by that fear that is rooted in a tremendous amount of falsehoods, a tremendous amount of bias, and a tremendous amount of misinformation, because there is a lack of awareness from a historical perspective that has just gripped people. There are individuals who, they're capitalizing on it, and there's other individuals who are just, frankly scared to death. And that's really sad. But I do think that fear is really that monster that affects all of us in one way or another, but it's just a matter of whether or not you choose to go and get information that directly addresses just what your fear is rooted in.
There was some show many years back where the question was asked to the audience, and the audience was vast majority was white at the time, and said, how many people here want to be black? Just based on what you know about black people in America. You keep everything. You keep your knowledge, you keep your income, you keep everything. You keep your family. You just wake up one day and you have a black skin color. Nobody raised their hands. You keep everything. Your family stays the same. Everything, you keep everything. The skin color changes. Okay. When I think about what needs to be done, we need to start to change the systems. People's systems needs to change. Systems needs to change. That's where the work that'll provide the most growth needs to happen. And for those systems to change, We need people who change systems to make the changes. And right now, those people are people who don't have the urgency to make the change because they don't feel the heat of the current experience. So DEI is saying, hey, what can we do to put more people in leadership, right? That might feel the heat, and hopefully that'll inspire more leaders, hopefully that'll inspire change to these processes and people policies. It's about changing, it's all about the equity piece. How do we change the system? And so if you're sitting there and you're wondering, hey, what is mine to do? I would say we are all on a different journey, right? And I would just ask that you do the work to educate yourself. There are great books. So find where you're at. And this is not just about unconscious bias training or implicit bias training or microaggression. These things are all very, very important, and we all need to be aware of these things. I'm speaking about you as a human being in this world.